Hello and welcome to SLP Full Disclosure. I am your host, Jennifer Martin, and joining me is my Friday Fun Day sidekick, Jonathan Carey.
Hey, happy Friday.
I know you may not be listening on a Friday, but it is Friday today. And so, okay, so now, Jonathan, I'm going to do something that's going to test you, but I feel like
I've been tested enough already today.
I know listen, I'm here to help you grow and develop as a human. That's all the things that I do that irritate you. I want you to remember, I'm helping you to grow and develop. Okay. All right. So I want you to tell me, it is Friday. Okay. So tell me what you're going to do this weekend, but you cannot use the words bike, bicycle, or cycling.
Okay. Well, going to look at houses.
Oh.
And then I will be pedaling around on a device, I guess we'll say. And we'll be doing that as well. So
peddling your wares. Peddling bad advice.
I am always doing that, so that's not exclusive for weekends.
Peddling your Girl Scout cookies.
You make some good money off of those.
Listen, I know you can. I had a Girl Scout and I watched how much money was made, and I was like, oh, they had something there. It was a good business idea. So, well, that sounds like fun. What
are you doing?
Was just going to see if I could test you and see, but you did. You passed the test. I'm proud of you. That was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am having okay, so let me ask you this first. Do you know what a golden birthday is?
Yeah.
Do you know how many people don't know what that is?
Yeah, I could see that. I for a long time I thought it was maybe like a Southern thing, but apparently not.
No, I don't think it is. But so my daughter, who's 12, just had her golden birthday. And so we're celebrating late. And so I'm going to have 5 12-year-old girls spending the night tonight. So
what a dream.
Light a candle for me. I know. Luckily, they don't really want a whole lot to do with me. I mean, I know that you're going to find this hard to believe, but I'm not cool. And I think I'm cool.
That
you
is
think
the
I'm cool.
Understatement of the year.
Everybody but her. So anyway, but yeah, so that's what we're gonna do. So
well, good luck. I hope you make it through the weekend.
Yeah, thank you. I'll report back if I don't show up for work Monday. I need you to send help. Do a welfare check. Okay. Yes. Well, okay. We have a very cool episode today, and you think I know it all by now, Jonathan. I mean, I like to think I do, but I learned a ton from our guest today, and just it really changed the way that I'm going to think about things. And I wish that I had this information years ago. Would have been really helpful. And so I think that our listeners are going to really find a lot of value in it. We're going to talk about natural language acquisition, Gestalt language processing, Echolalia, just a wealth of information. And let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Our guest today is Alexandria Zachos, and she goes by Alex, and she is a speech language pathologist and has been practicing for over 18 years. She owns a private practice called Social Butterfly Incorporated in the near west suburbs of Chicago. And Alex created meaningfulspeech.com in 2021 to educate SLPs, professionals, and parents on Gestalt language processing, Echolalia, and the natural language acquisition framework that was developed by her mentor, speech language pathologist Marge Blanc. So welcome to Alex. Zachos. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. You have a really cool story and area of expertise. And before we jump into that, I always just like to know what was your professional journey and how did you end up where you currently are?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually been a speech language pathologist for going on almost 19 years, which feels really crazy to say out loud. I started out working in the schools like many speech language pathologists, and then kind of on the side, I worked at some outpatient centers and I did acute care for a little bit in there and then some early intervention. And in 2012, my first daughter was born, and I decided to take a year maternity leave to maybe think about private practice. And that has been basically my career for the past 10 years. I own a private practice in Illinois called Social Butterfly Incorporated. And originally, our focus was very much on pragmatic language. That was a huge interest area of mine, and I ran a lot of social language groups. Around 2016, so yeah, right about 6 years ago, I really started looking all over the place for some information on echolalia. I was getting a lot of calls. And the parent would initially say, my child is struggling socially, but upon, further discussion, in many of these cases, I would see that they were struggling socially because they were scripting or echoing either things they heard people say to them or lines from books or movies. And yes, that can look like a social difficulty, but really, I wanted to dig into what was going on with their language and what I had been taught, many years ago in graduate school, and then through my, journey through working at all these different places. I had been taught ignore it, redirect it, say no movie talk. And a lot of other SLPs that I had, kind of reached out to said the same thing to me. Nobody really knew what to do. So I feel like it was, just this amazing moment when I happened to be on a Facebook group and someone had posted Marge Blanc's book, Natural Language Acquisition. And the post was all about how this had changed so much for them and they finally understood echolalia. So I just immediately clicked it, bought it. I am a reader, but I will say that I have never read a work-related or textbook so quickly. I probably got through that in a week and have actually read it several times since. And it changed everything for me. And I immediately reached out to Marge Blanc and I wanted to know everything that she knew. And that kind of started our journey together. She has mentored me over the past 6 years. And this is turning into a long story, but basically, right around the time of the pandemic, I decided I had to take this and teach other people about it. So Marge's book has been out there since 2012, but I think a lot of SLPs did not know about it. And then also, it is hard for busy SLPs a lot of times to sit down and read a book. So all the SLPs I had come into contact with through private practice, school-based or in other settings, nobody knew about this. So I took it to social media and I started an Instagram, and then I developed an online course. And your listeners can find all of that at Meaningful Speech, and the website is meaningfulspeech.com. And I'm really happy to say that a whole lot more SLPs and parents know about this now. And the word has really spread. And so here I am today to talk more about it.
I love this journey. And I think it just goes to show that I always love a full circle moment where it's like, you were working in your private practice to bring in social pragmatics, but not necessarily specializing in echolalia, but then incorporating that, because you're right, that is such an important piece of the social pragmatics. And you are so right. I know guilty as charged. I remember working the first few years out of graduate school and feeling like I had no idea what to do with my students that had echolalic speech. And I know that what I did do was not probably, it wasn't effective. It wasn't doing anything. So I would have loved to have had your knowledge during that time, because you're exactly right. It is a challenge. And we will also can link Marge Blanc's book name in your bio, because until I talked to you originally, I had not heard of her. And so I feel like she's changed your entire course of practice. So I think it's important to have other people know about her as well.
Absolutely. And that book is sold through Northern Speech Services. She also has some courses on there. We can link to all of this, but I've done several posts too about other free resources that are out there for people to learn about this. So she also has several YouTube webinars that she's done as well.
That's awesome. I know I always say SLPs are such a just generous community. I feel like there's a whole, just to share and help each other grow. So I know that, and I'm probably going to get some of this terminology or the links of things incorrect, because again, this is something that you're so versed in, but I feel like so many of us are not. But I want to talk a little bit about natural language acquisition, NLA, and because I know this ties into your work so much as well. Yes. So for those of us like myself, who this was a newer concept, would you define that natural language acquisition and tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so let me kind of give a super quick background before I get into that.
Please.
So kids that communicate with delayed echolalia are Gestalt language processors. So this is the way that they process and develop language. The thing that is shocking to a lot of speech pathologists and parents really is that there are two ways to develop language. And I think as SLPs, we were taught in graduate school about just one path, and that's analytic language processing or development. So a kid babbles, and then they have one word, and then two words, and three words, and then phrases and sentences. And that's the buildup of how language develops. Well, for our Gestalt processors, it's actually almost the reverse. So they're starting out with longer chunks or units of language, which we call gestalts or scripts, because Gestalt means a whole. And then what they're doing in their development journey is they're breaking down those scripts, mixing and matching in what we call stage 2. And in stage 3, they're finally understanding or processing single words as units. And in stage 4, they are developing their own novel sentences, phrases with beginning grammar. And that's where NLA or natural language acquisition comes in. Marge Blanc coined that term, and it is the framework of this Gestalt language development and helping a child move through these stages. So stage 1, delayed echolalia, stage 2, mix and match the gestalts, and stage 3, single words, and stage 4, beginning grammar. There is a stage 5 and 6, and that is more advanced grammar. But I tell most SLPs that's what you already know. I think most SLPs feel good about stages 3 through 6. We're like, yeah, words, beginning grammar, advanced grammar, we got that. I think a lot of the confusion lies in stages 1 and 2, because an SLP will hear a kid scripting and they're immediately like, let's get rid of that, you need more words. Whereas a kid that's in stage 1, they actually need more scripts. And the more scripts that we give them, the more opportunity they will have to mix and match those when they're ready for stage 2. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And it almost sounds like you have to, if you've learned it one way, you almost have to unlearn it to then but then to do it this way is actually going to be more beneficial. So I love that. And SLPs, we love a framework. We love a process. We want to know, like, okay, first this, then this. So it sounds like this allows and gives a framework, but also is based on each individual, because as we know, no two present the same. So is that correct in how I'm understanding it?
It is. And there's just so much more to all of this that we probably don't have time to dig into in a podcast.
Yeah.
But I post about a lot of this on my social media that people can check out. But, stage 1 looks very different for different kids. A script to one kid could actually be a single word, but it's like a full unit to them. And then to other kids, it's this extremely long movie line that they picked up from somewhere. And then for others, it can sound quote unquote functional, like I need a blanket, but it's actually a script that they say every single time they sit on the couch. So it can look very different for different kids in stage 1. And I talk about how we can identify this in kids and how we respond to them and what we can do to help support them through their language development journey.
Yeah. And you're exactly right that this is this is kind of an intro, but I think the resources that you provide and then even that book would be, if someone wants to really dig in, that's where they want to go, but just kind of getting a framework for all this. It's interesting too, because it's, I remember, like you said, like we don't want you to use scripts. We don't want you to do that. But It sounds like that's actually a tool.
It is.
That you want to encourage.
We do. And so the big takeaway I would like to give your audience today is, if you are communicating with or working with anyone that is scripting or communicating with delayed echolalia, the thing I would like you to do is to acknowledge it. So don't try to extinguish it or redirect it or ignore it. Absolutely accept it as communication and acknowledge it. So how do we do that? We can either repeat what they're saying, because when we repeat it back, we're saying, I heard you, I got it. Oh, I need a blanket? Okay. Or we can smile or nod or say, yeah, or okay. And I currently am working with a client whose gestalts are largely unintelligible. And this happens a lot with our younger kids who are not motorically caught up yet. And they are trying to say like a 6, 7 word gestalt that they picked up from somewhere. And these kids are gestalt processors. They are what we call intonation babies, and that's from the research of Dr. Ann Peters and Dr. Barry Present, and they pick up on the intonation. They're not picking up on the word units, they're picking up on the intonation. So my current client, I might hear him say something like, da, 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 or that's what it sounds like to me. So I obviously can't repeat that back, but I'm acknowledging every time he says that. I'm accepting that as communication, and I'm going, yeah, okay. And I think the foundational step for all of this is to build that trusting relationship with the client so that they know that you're there to support their language. I think too often, so many of these kids have ended up in therapies where we're constantly trying to get them to do something different or trying to get them to stop doing something. So whether that be compliance-based therapies like ABA, or whether that be traditional speech therapy looked at through an analytic lens. So I think 2 things, again, like build that trust with your client and acknowledge everything that they're saying, accept it as communication.
Yeah, I just had this very sad feeling as you're talking, because I'm thinking you're right. I mean, that when they're ignored, I mean, all we're encouraging is for them not to communicate, because, right. It's like the opposite of attention is not, is ignoring. And so you're right. I mean, they're in their way communicating. And so when we say, nope, we're going to ignore it because we want to extinguish it, it's actually really working against us and them. So that is, I think, a huge, I'm so glad you said that, because I do think that is such an important reminder. And even if you're right, even if it's not intelligible, then it's critical, because we are specialists in communication. So we don't want to make people feel like they can't or don't want to communicate.
Right. And I just want to kind of speak to all the parents and SLPs out there listening right now and say, like, please don't feel guilty if you've been doing this, because I did it too. And so I'm never here to shame anyone. I always say know better, do better. Yeah. So I think now that this knowledge is coming more to light for more people, they're starting to change their practices and the way that they are, looking at this type of therapy, because again, if you're looking at everything through an analytic lens, you're looking at this like they're not doing what they need to do. I have to completely change things around. That's my job. And I actually think a lot of SLPs have found freedom through learning about this. Like, I can breathe a sigh of relief. Like, I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to go with the way their language is supposed to develop.
Yeah, and I think that what you said is so important, because guilty as charged with everything you said, and you're right. This isn't a shame on you, but just as anything in life. And I think another really important piece of this too is that a lot of us did learn that way because that was the information at the time. So people, you're doing things that you feel like is best practice at the time, but as more research and information comes out, it's like, oh, now we can change. I mean, it'd be no different than any other field. Like, think about medicine and the things that used to happen that we look at and think, how barbaric, how archaic, but that's what was known. And now we know different. So I'm glad you pointed that out. This is not a, shame on you, but just a truly like, wow, I never thought about it that way. That's really interesting and is going to help me change the way I'm practicing. So we'll be right back to our interview. Take a moment to stretch your legs, but don't go anywhere, because we want to talk to you about our podcast partner, Med Travelers. Med Travelers is an industry leader in allied travel career opportunities for a reason. Featuring exclusive jobs at top-tier facilities across the United States, higher earning potential, W-2 employee status, and a flexible schedule. Med Travelers is your advocate for career success. Make sure to visit medtravelers.com to discover how Med Travelers can help drive your career forward. Again, go to medtravelers.com to start your travel journey today. And now back to the show. And I want to go back for a minute too, and just, now that, we've talked about the NLA, how it relates to echolalia. Can you give us a refresher, or just for those of us, again, for this being new information, what are the types of echolalia? And I've just always been curious, like, what is happening when they're, in the student's brain, or what is the reason behind it? So maybe just different types and why it happens.
Sure. So there are two main types of echolalia: the delayed echolalia, which is what I've been talking about, and that is our Gestalt language processors. That's how they're communicating. And then there's immediate echolalia, and that's when you repeat something right away. So I say, "What's your name?" and the child says, "What's your name?" right back to me. Immediate echolalia is not part of natural language acquisition. It's completely separate, but there's a lot of research on it that has been published, and there are a lot of different functions of immediate echolalia. So some of them might be the child is trying to process the language that you're saying, or another function might be they are buying time to come up with an answer. And another might be, some of our Gestalt processors also use immediate echolalia. So, another function might be that it's part of the way that they're processing language. They are processing things in these big units. They are not able to process each individual word as a unit yet until they get to stage 3, which I mentioned earlier. So I think the number one thing is figure out, I call this detective work. Be the detective, figure out what is the meaning behind what they're doing. I think all too often we're like, get rid of this, fix it, change it. And we need to be thinking about, okay, why is this happening? What kind of a purpose is this serving for them? Because for some of our Gestalt processors, when they are using immediate echolalia in a session with me, I'm really happy. I'm like, oh, they just accepted my language. Like, that resonated with them. So they just said exactly what I said. Cool, that's great. And a lot of times we are looking at it negatively, like, they're repeating me. It's not original. So we, again, back to that detective work, we really need to figure out why. And how do we do that? Something else that I teach a lot about is language samples. So we take lots and lots of language samples, and we really get to know the child's language. And I think, unfortunately, language samples is something that in a lot of places have fallen by the wayside, and everyone's all about the standardized tests. And while we can glean some good information from those, depending on what the child is struggling with, I do not think that they are appropriate for our Gestalt processors, at least not until they're in the advanced stages in self-generating language and working more on grammar. When they're in these beginning stages, we really, really need to look at language samples. That's going to tell us what their true language is.
Yeah, I think that's such a great call out because, I think sometimes we get into the, we're busy. SLPs are spread thin. It's like, okay, got to get that standardized score. But it's like, why are you doing what you're doing? What is that information giving you? Versus, I think you're right. These instances, the language sample is actually going to give you information that you can use. And that's what we want is information we can use.
Yeah. And I just quickly wanted to add about the language sample. So some SLPs that are listening might be thinking, oh, MLU, mean length of utterance, Browns. So those are all analytic stuff. For our Gestalt processors, our language samples are going to be scored through the natural language acquisition framework. And I teach how to do this in my course, and the information is also in Marge Blanc's book. But basically, you are going to look at what you've written down that the child has said and try to figure out what stage that falls into. And a lot of SLPs find this really hard to do in the beginning because it's like you said, unlearning or changing the way your brain is looking at something. But it definitely gets easier over time. And in my course, I have a lot of practice. So my own clients and people practice scoring their language samples, which I think is really helpful. And that's how I got better at it, just by doing it over and over again.
Yeah, it's like, I remember the first time, grad school doing a Goldman Frister or anything, you're like, but once you do it, you're like, oh, you could do it with your, half awake. So, and I do love that because I do feel like sometimes we feel like, but I need a score. I need something, tangible at the end of this. And it sounds like the NLA and that scoring system does give them something tangible to say, okay, this is information I can now work with.
Correct. And then we also go over how to write goals. And I know people are really into, is this measurable? So we talk about how to write measurable goals. And, I have talked to SLPs taking my course about the fact that they sometimes work at facilities that require those standardized tests. So, I say sometimes we can't get around that. So give the test, but just realize that information's not going to help you. The child is probably not going to score well on that test. The information that will help you are the language samples.
Yeah, and you're right. It's frustrating for everybody when you're trying to administer a standardized test that is not going to go anywhere versus working with them where they're at, taking that information they're giving you and actually then using it to create meaningful goals. So that's a great, I love that as an alternative. If you still need those scores and information, you can get it this way. And would you give me an example? So I feel like I understand that delayed echolalia, and those are those kids that get a script, for example, like if they have a quote from a movie that you're going to hear that throughout the day. What would immediate echolalia look like if you were with a student?
So these are kids that are immediately repeating what you say to them. So if I say, let's go get our shoes on, they say, let's go get our shoes on. It's just an immediate repetition of what you're saying. And a lot of people view this as a comprehension difficulty. Well, why are they repeating it back to me? They're not answering me, or they're not saying, yeah, there's my shoes. And sometimes it can be, but I want people to look really deeper at what they feel like the function of that is. And my number one tip for people working with kids that use a lot of immediate echolalia is silence. As SLPs, we talk a lot, and parents talk a lot as well. And this has been very hard to do for everyone. I've recommended it too, but sit back and don't say let's do this or that. Just sit back, and what I want people to listen for is the child's spontaneous language, because in a lot of cases, a lot of these kids also use delayed echolalia or are Gestalt processors, but we haven't heard that because we're bombarding them with questions all the time. So, refrain from the questions and just silence. And then a lot of people will come back and say, yeah, I heard some spontaneous language that I'd never heard before. I didn't realize. And it's very revealing. I think when we look at our own behavior and try to take a step back and actually let the child be who they are and play how they're going to play, we really do hear that true language emerge.
Yeah, what a great reminder, because I think you're right. Well, I know you're right. I resemble that remark because I think sometimes if we aren't getting that immediate what we think we want or need from the child, then we just, okay, well, I got to try. I got to do it. So you're right. Just stop, take a breath and listen. And that is a very important reminder. And it sounds like too, with that delayed, it's going to be that, repetition. You're going to hear a lot of the same things, whereas that immediate, it's basically not going to be that because it's just whatever was said last.
Right.
Yeah.
And so let me say about the delayed echolalia too. I often talk about this. It is, most times tied to an emotional memory, a dramatic memory. So someone had written in and told me that they had freaked out because they saw a bug, and they said, there's a bug. And they were standing somewhere in their house.
Yeah.
And so every time the child went to that spot in the house, they would say, there's a bug, like bug or not, because it was tied to that emotional memory. This happens a lot with our autistic kids and different experiences they have. I think this comes up a lot in the autism research more than anywhere else. But, a child might start screaming at a red light because we don't know why. Why are they all of a sudden distraught? And then we realize, oh my gosh, we're outside the dentist's office and they had a horrible experience at the dentist. So now they're screaming in the car at the red light. There's just a lot of those emotional episodes stored in the gestalts that they are communicating with.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I'm thinking about some students that I've worked with, and it was usually tied to something very exciting to them, or it was, you're right. Now I'm thinking about it, it was something that was a high emotion, whether it be a positive, a happy, excited, or like you said, I'm fear.
Traumatic.
Yeah. Which the dentist can be. Yeah. So that is really interesting. So, and again, just even thinking, I think we've just used that umbrella term echolalia for everything, but you're right. I think it's such an important differentiator between the two types.
Yeah. And if people want to dig more into this, I have several posts about this, and I always share the research, and I have a free downloadable PDF on my website that's called Resources in Research. And it's like several pages of everything that's out there basically on these topics.
That is so cool. Gosh, I say this often. I'm like, where were these people when I was starting? But you were also,
I feel the same.
Yeah, you were just getting started too, and I was. So but yeah, what a cool, I think that better, you do better. So that's just what we got to remember.
Exactly.
And what are I'm thinking, my autistic students were the ones that I would most often hear the echolalic speech with, but is there any other diagnoses that maybe you see this in?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So I want your listeners to know that Gestalt language development is a normal way of developing language. And there are tons of kids and people out there that develop language this way that have no diagnosis. They probably went through the stages so quickly that no one even noticed they were a Gestalt processor. A lot of these kids are sometimes labeled as late talkers because we were hearing a lot of what we called jargon. So that da, 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 and we weren't hearing words until maybe later, 2, 3, even 4 years old. Why is that? I think a lot of times it's because they're in that stage 1. They're not motorically caught up for those gestalts, but they just move themselves through the stages. So then, we do start hearing words in stage 3 and their phrases, their novel sentences in stages 4, 5, and 6. So I think there are so many Gestalt language processors running around out there that, we never looked at it that way because they didn't need support. So what my course and all the education that I'm doing is all about is it's for the kids that need support. So kids that are sort of living in those beginning stages and have not moved forward. And a lot of the times that is our autistic kids. So I did share some current research last week that we're now seeing that pretty much most, if not all, autistic individuals are Gestalt language processors. So I think if you're listening to this and you work with or parent a child that is autistic, it is highly likely that they are a Gestalt language processor. Now, do they immediately need to go get support? Maybe, maybe not. I think there are a lot of autistic individuals that have also gone through the stages on their own and figured it out. Several have been guests on this monthly series that I do called Lunch and Learn, and we can link to my YouTube channel that has a lot of those interviews. But a lot of autistic adults I've spoken to have said, I don't know how I got to flexible original language. I think I just figured it out. And I said, yeah, because it is a language development journey. So they got there. Now, some of our other kids and most of the ones that end up being referred to a speech language therapist or pathologist, they are not moving through those stages on their own, and they need our support. A lot of times other things are involved in this. So I talk a lot about sensory integration and regulation and how the body plays a huge role in this. Motor speech, we talk about that a lot. Other comorbidities that can come into play, like anxiety, other things like that. So, we have to kind of look at the whole child in the bigger picture. But right now, circling back to your question, I would say the majority of people that we are helping support right now are autistic individuals that are Gestalt language processors.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you pointed that out, that it isn't, yes, the majority, but that there are others that learn this way. And I'm just thinking back as you're talking of, because I had worked in early intervention for years before moving to babies. And so many of them who did not have a diagnosis at that time of any kind that we knew of were presenting this way, and and that was always, to me, like, I thought, oh, well, it's because they understand the pattern, the rhythm of language, and then they'll start plugging in those words. But I'm thinking they probably were the Gestalt language learners.
Yeah.
And I so I'm having a lot of flashbacks right now of like,
I had such a light bulb moment when I read about Marge shares a story about 2 boys in a sandbox at the beginning of her book. And I remember where I was sitting when I read that. And it was such a moment for me because, like you, I did spend some time in early intervention too. And I just thought, oh my goodness, what if I had known that back then? But that's okay. We know it now.
And I seriously, I'm like, yes. I mean, and I still do some occasional work with these kids. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I would have approached it very differently because, and just, you're right that it was not every kid developing language that way. So it wasn't like this typical, oh, everybody does this. It was just some of them. And I never put the pieces together as to why. And that now it's like, oh, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking too, like you said with, yes, it sounds like the adults, autistic adults, yeah, they do learn and develop strategies. But gosh, how great if you were a parent or a clinician that knew this right now, because then you knew how they were learning language, so you could meet them where they are instead of them probably spending their whole life trying to develop. It's like, this is where that knowledge is power. If you know why somebody's doing something, gosh, then you can actually really support that process.
Yeah, I have to say that's one of the reasons why I chose Instagram as my social media kind of debut, because I knew a lot of young speech pathologists and younger parents were on there, and I really wanted to catch people at the beginning. Now a lot of older SLPs have taken the course and have come to realize all of this. And I'm not saying I don't want to educate older SLPs, but it's like, to your point, I think we have to catch people at the beginning and give them that information right away. And this is not being taught in very many graduate programs. As of today, I think it's like 6 or 7 programs in the US that are actually teaching it.
Wow.
And I did have Dr. Lillian Stiegler, who was a professor, she just retired at Southeastern Louisiana, as a guest on one of my lunch and learns, and she talked about why. So I won't get into that today, but why this isn't really being taught that much in graduate school. So I am getting a lot of CFs and younger SLPs that are wanting to take the course, because once they get out into that field, they're like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. And I agree. I wish that I had this, because, and I think if you know that you're part of the population I'll be working with are autistic students, adults, etc., I think, gosh, this would be a no-brainer. But now it's like, wow, knowing that there is a percentage of other population that learn this way, this would have made all the difference, especially working with these little guys, because then I would have been able to meet them where they were. And wow. Yeah, I've had a few little moments of, oh my gosh. So I want to go into, I know we're going to do a couple of little case studies here at the end, but I wanted to just, before we do that, break down a little bit about some of the courses you teach, and again, who would they be appropriate for, and how that works.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, I have a course that I just call the Meaningful Speech course, that has a parent and other professional track and a SLP track. So we have 2 different tracks, because we do offer CMHs for ASHA for the speech pathologists, and they are able to take a final exam and get the opportunity to be listed on our NLA trained clinician registry, and we'll link to that. But basically, parents are able to go on there and find a local SLP, which has been amazing, because parents are looking for someone that understands this. When they go to their local clinic or cold call, most SLPs out there still don't really understand this. So they know that the person has been through the course and really gets it. So that's the SLP track. And then the parent or other professional track is basically just the content. And it's lifetime access, and people can log in and out whenever they want, which I think a lot of people appreciate, and they can go back and view different modules. It is rather long. The core modules are 8 hours long, and then I have a lot of bonus modules on various topics and a lot of interviews with different people in our field, and that's about 11.5 hours. And some of those different topics are AAC, motor speech, sensory regulation, data collection. So we try to cover everything, and basically right now, I feel like if people take that, they are able to go implement this like the next day in therapy. And we've gotten a lot of messages from people that have said that. My huge frustration with every course that I have pretty much taken in the past 18 years has been that it has been so theoretical that I walk away with like, what am I actually doing in therapy? And so I really feel like this is a how-to. So I show a lot of client videos. We have a lot of handouts that support what we're teaching. Like it truly is, this is how you do this. This is how you can use the NLA framework. This is how you can talk to parents about their Gestalt processors. And then the other product that we just released this week that we offer is the Gestalt Language Processing Handbook. And that's for coaching and education. And it's a digital download. It's basically those like little sheets that we had back in the day from places like Super Duper, where you could download and explain different things about speech. We have created that for Gestalt language processors. And Katie Arnold, who is an SLP on my team, wrote it. And they're all like just quick one-page things that you can hand to parents. Like, this is how I feel like your child's developing language. This is what we're going to try doing. This is how you can support them at home.
That is so cool that you've done all this. So it's, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, I've spent so many hours on courses just to like, okay, I got to get those 30 hours, it's just to check a box versus something that's really going to change the way I practice or just help me look at things in a new way. So that I love that you recognize that and have your course is presented and set up that way. So it sounds like, so is it correct that so your coursework is then allows them to take the test and then they can be certified? So is that kind of the
So I don't call it certification because I don't feel like anyone needs to be really certified in any of this. I like really a lot of things we do in our field. I don't think you need a actual certification, but they do get a certificate. And what it allows them to do is be on this registry where parents know that they have this coursework and this background. I will be honest, I think that it is very hard for a lot of SLPs to learn and understand this just from reading some things. So I think that's why the course has, been pretty popular this year with SLPs because they are able to actually visually see this in action and get it explained to them in a way that's digestible. And so they're able to take that and put it into practice.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, you're exactly right. Because I'm thinking if I tried to go, I'll just go research this on my own and do it, I think I'd end up getting frustrated, not understand, and then not do anything with it because, but like you said, to have it in digestible pieces and you've obviously set it up in a way that, is going to be easy to understand. And then it breaks it up into bite-sized pieces instead of like, okay, here you go. Here's some books. Go figure this out yourself.
Right. Yeah. And we all know how busy SLPs are. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to just hand someone something and say, okay, in your free time, like, look at all of this. I think the cool thing about online courses, and like I use Kajabi, the platform that I use, is like people are playing it off their phone, like during their commute. And they're just like, oh, I have 15 minutes before an IEP meeting, play. Like, it's just they're finding ways to work it in. And I do feel like that is just a game changer for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you probably get more into it, it's like, oh my gosh, I want to, you start to see how it could actually change your practice. And then it probably becomes even more motivating. So that is, so course is step one. And then the test is step two. And then once you get the certificate, and thank you for clarifying that, because you're right. Sometimes it's like, well, I'm certification. It's like, it's, doesn't mean everything. And then they can be in that registry, because I think you're right. Yes. A lot of parents now will seek out and want to know what areas of expertise we have, because
Yes.
we could have so many as SLPs. So that's a great resource.
Yeah, and that's at meaningfulspeechregistry.com, and we can link to that too.
Great. So we will put all of that in the notes. Now, I know we only have a few minutes. Do we have time to do a quick case study, or is that going to be?
I can quickly present
a
couple of quick cases.
Perfect.
So I want to talk about what this might look like for a younger child and then an older child. I'll go kind of quickly, but I would say if you're taking that intake call and you're looking at that case study and the parent is of a younger child, either telling you they have few or not many words, and they're jargoning, quote unquote, or babbling a lot, and that they also maybe, for example, are musical or attracted to certain songs or TV shows, those can all be signs that you might need to look at them through the Gestalt language development lens. In either case, I'm going to set up my evaluation to be in a language sample assessment and a child-led play-based assessment. And so my little guy I was talking about earlier, this was the exact type of phone call I got for him. Let's call him Eddie. I don't currently have clients with that name. So Eddie comes in, we do a play-based child-led assessment, and I take all these language samples and I find out that his scripts are not, your typical media scripts. They're definitely things he heard people say to him or that happened during these, fun emotional experiences. I had a client one time that used to say too much money. And I realized that came from a trip to a store where they couldn't buy something. So now every time they couldn't do something, they would say too much money. And I realized over language samples what that meant to them. So then the first step would be to acknowledge. So let's say that was one of Eddie's scripts, too much money. I would acknowledge it and say, oh yeah, too much money. Since I've done the detective work, I'm now going to model what I think he wants to say. So I would then say, oh, I shouldn't do that, or I can't do that, or I won't do that, or whatever's appropriate at that time. Let's pretend this was also Eddie, but I walked into my room one time and he was spinning around on my desk chair. And I just kind of gave a surprise, like, oh, and he said, too much money. So I know I shouldn't be spinning in your desk chair. So then I modeled in that moment, yeah, that's not for kids. That chair is not meant to be spun on by you. I mean, I actually have spun kids in my desk chair several times, but I don't like them to do it alone.
Fair. That's fair.
So I know we're totally out of time. I was going to present an older example, but maybe we can cut that out. But
yes.
That would be one case study of a kid from the beginning where you don't quite know what direction it's going to go in, but you start out with language samples and you start looking at patterns and then realize, okay, this is a kid I need to look at the NLA framework with.
Okay, that was so cool. I've learned so much from you today, Alex. This has been wonderful. We will put all of these links in the show notes. And I just encourage, and again, with your Instagram, and you're just a wealth of knowledge. And so thank you so much for joining us today. This was very, very helpful and useful information. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up this episode. Thank you for tuning into SLP Full Disclosure. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes on our website at medtravelers.com/SLP Full Disclosure. And don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss a guest. Are you interested in becoming a travel SLP? Visit medtravelers.com to learn more and explore the exciting opportunities we offer at top-level facilities across the country. Also, a special thanks to Jonathan Carey for producing this episode and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. And as always, this episode was powered by Med Travelers. See you next time.